My name is Sophia Carter, and if you asked me to sum up my life, I'd tell you it has always felt like a long, dusty Texas road, lonely, harsh, but lined with small stops of warmth that kept me moving forward. I'm 30 years old now, a former Army sergeant who traded the battlefield for a quiet life running a modest security company outside Dallas. I never needed luxury. An old pickup truck, a rented apartment, and the discipline I carried from service were enough. What mattered most were the lessons my grandparents gave me, their voices, reminding me that integrity always outweighs greed. I had no idea those lessons would soon become my shield. Because after my grandparents died in a sudden plane crash, their lawyer revealed a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew. I was the sole heir to their $39 million estate. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside, but inside, it was colder than any winter storm. My parents, Jonathan and Diane Carter, had built their lives around ambition. My father was a real estate developer who loved talking about skyscrapers and deals more than he ever loved sitting down to dinner with his children. My mother, an interior designer, spent more time in lavish homes of wealthy clients than in her own. To everyone else, they were a glamorous couple, successful, admired, untouchable. To me, they were strangers who happened to live under the same roof. My brother Ethan was 3 years older and quickly learned how to chase their attention. He wore expensive sneakers, begged for the newest gadgets, and paraded his good grades in front of them like trophies. And it worked. Dad's hand would rest on his shoulder, proud, while I stood in the corner, invisible. I was different. Quiet. A book in hand instead of a shiny bicycle. A sketchbook instead of makeup or trendy clothes. While Ethan thrived in the shallow spotlight of my parents' approval, I longed for something simpler: warmth, a hug, someone to ask how my day had been. That warmth came from two people who never cared about status or money. My grandparents, Walter and Margaret Carter. They lived on a sprawling ranch just outside town, where the air smelled of fresh hay and the sky seemed endless. Unlike the glossy, cold surfaces of my parents' world, their home was lived in, filled with laughter, the aroma of cornbread, and the comforting creak of old wooden floors. I still remember the first time I truly ran away there. I was 8 years old. Mom and Dad were screaming in the kitchen about debt and investments, their voices sharp as knives. Ethan sat frozen in front of the TV, pretending not to hear. My chest felt so tight that I grabbed my bike and pedaled furiously down the dirt road, tears stinging my eyes until I reached the ranch. Grandpa was outside, sleeves rolled up, repairing an old tractor. He didn't ask me what was wrong. He just handed me a wrench and said, "Help me out, kiddo. Manual work clears the mind." We worked in silence until the sun dipped low, painting the fields in gold. When Grandma called us in for dinner, Texas barbecue with fresh salad and warm pie, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: safe. They didn't pry. They didn't ask me to explain why I had shown up with red eyes and scraped knees. They simply gave me a seat at the table, a slice of pie, and a place where I belonged. That night, while Grandpa told stories about starting his trucking company with nothing but one old vehicle and a dream, I realized that success didn't have to be loud or greedy. It could be quiet, steady, and honest. From then on, the ranch became my refuge. Every chance I got, I rode my bike there. Grandpa taught me how to drive small trucks, how to repair engines, and most importantly, that a promise was sacred. Grandma taught me patience, how to grow vegetables in the stubborn soil, how to listen more than I spoke. "Independence, Sophia," she would remind me. "Don't let money own you, you own it." Those words wrapped around me like armor. At school, when kids teased me for wearing the same clothes more than once, I reminded myself of Grandma's quiet dignity. At home, when Ethan flaunted his new gadgets, I thought of Grandpa's calloused hands and the pride in honest work. I didn't know it then, but my grandparents weren't just filling the void my parents left. They were planting seeds, values, resilience, faith that would one day determine the course of my entire life. As I grew older, the gap between my parents' world and mine only widened. Ethan seemed born for their glittering lifestyle: cocktail parties, luxury vacations, the endless cycle of chasing status. I, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with it. Every time Dad spoke about me joining the family business, my stomach tightened. I had watched how money consumed him, how it turned Mom's smile brittle and left Ethan hollow behind his polished grin. When I turned 18, I made a decision that shocked them all. I enlisted in the army. Dad laughed when I told him. "Sophia, you won't last a week in boots," he sneered. Mom cried, saying I was throwing my future away. Ethan just shook his head, muttering that I was too naive. But Grandpa smiled. "Good," he said simply. "Discipline. Service. That's how you'll find out who you really are." He was right. The army was brutal. Long nights, endless drills, the constant pressure of knowing one mistake could cost lives. But strangely, I thrived. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. My effort mattered, my choices counted. I carried my grandparents' words like a compass through every deployment. Integrity, independence, trust. I served for nearly a decade, and though those years scarred me, they also shaped me. When I finally returned home, I didn't go to my parents' house. I drove straight to the ranch. Grandma wrapped me in her arms as if no time had passed. Grandpa, his hair whiter and his hands more worn, clapped my shoulder. "Knew you'd come back stronger," he said, and for once, I believed him. Instead of following my father's footsteps into real estate, I started small. With the savings I'd managed to put aside and a few contacts from my service years, I built a modest security company on the outskirts of Dallas. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. We specialized in protecting small businesses, diners, warehouses, mom-and-pop shops that couldn't afford big corporate contracts but still deserved safety. Life was simple. Wake up at dawn, work out, train my team, visit clients, return home exhausted but satisfied. I didn't need a mansion or a fancy car. My old pickup and a quiet apartment were enough. Still, no matter how busy I was, I called my grandparents every week. I'd tell them about the contracts we landed, the employees I was mentoring. Grandpa would laugh heartily through the receiver. "Remember, Sophia, security isn't just about locks and cameras. It's about protecting trust." Grandma always asked about my health, slipping in motherly advice my own mother never gave me. Those phone calls became my lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in the world. And yet, beneath the routine, there was an unshakable truth. My parents hadn't changed. They still called occasionally not to ask how I was, but to lure me back into their collapsing empire. "Sophia, think of the family. Ethan's already helping. It's your turn." But every time, I refused, because I had already chosen my path, and I had no idea how much that choice would matter when tragedy struck. The call came on a gray morning, one of those mornings where the sky feels too heavy, as if it knows what's about to happen. I was at my office, reviewing security footage for a client, when my phone buzzed. It was my father. His voice, usually loud and commanding, trembled. "Sophia, your grandparents, their plane, it went down. There were no survivors." For a moment, the world blurred. My pen slipped from my hand, clattering onto the desk. I couldn't breathe. They weren't soldiers in a war zone. They weren't reckless adventurers. They were just going on a long-awaited vacation. How could something so ordinary end so violently? I drove like a madwoman to the ranch, my hands gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. Every mile dragged up memories. Afternoons fixing trucks with Grandpa, evenings baking pies with Grandma, their voices telling me to stay true. By the time I reached the ranch, tears blinded me. The house was filled with people, neighbors, employees from their company, even church friends. My mother sat in a corner, wailing. My father paced, his phone glued to his ear as he spoke urgently to someone about lawyers and assets. Ethan stood stiffly, his eyes darting around the room, already calculating, already scheming. The funeral was simple, just as they would have wanted. A modest service at the local church, no gilded displays, no extravagant show. But the turnout was immense. Hundreds of people came to pay respects. Truck drivers, warehouse workers, local farmers. They all shared stories about how Grandpa had once paid them out of his own pocket when times were tough, how Grandma had organized charity drives for struggling families. Listening, I felt both pride and devastation. But underneath the grief, I could sense something darker stirring. My father's eyes gleamed during the service, his words about continuing their legacy sounding hollow. My mother whispered between sobs, "At least we'll have something to carry on with." And Ethan? He couldn't even meet my gaze, as if he already knew what was coming. A few days later, we were summoned to the office of Matthew Harris, the family lawyer who had been my grandparents' trusted advisor for decades. The office smelled of old paper and stale coffee, its shelves lined with leather-bound books. I sat at the long wooden table with my parents, Ethan, and Uncle Mark, who had flown in from England. Even Samuel, the housekeeper who had served my grandparents for over 20 years, was there as a witness. My heart hammered in my chest. I wasn't thinking about money. I just wanted to know if my grandparents had left behind words for me, anything to hold on to. Matthew adjusted his glasses, his face grave. "This will was last updated 6 months ago," he began. "It leaves the entirety of Walter and Margaret Carter's estate, including their ranch, real estate holdings, shares in Blue Star Logistics, and cash reserves estimated at $39 million, to their granddaughter Sophia Carter." The room fell into stunned silence. I couldn't even process the number. 39 million? Me? My mouth went dry, and for a moment I thought I'd misheard. Then, the explosion came. "What?" my father roared, slamming his fist on the table. "This is absurd. She manipulated them." My mother burst into tears, her voice shrill. "Sophia, what did you do? Why would they cut us out?" Ethan's face twisted in fury. "How many times did you sneak out there? How did you convince them to choose you?" Uncle Mark sneered, his English accent sharp as a blade. "This must be a mistake. We'll challenge it. I won't sit back while a girl who runs a 2-bit security company inherits everything." I sat frozen, my ears ringing. I hadn't done anything. I loved them. That was all. Matthew raised his hand to calm the chaos. "Please, there is more. Your grandparents anticipated this reaction. They left behind a video message." He dimmed the lights, and the projector flickered on. My breath caught as Grandpa's familiar face filled the screen. Grandma sitting beside him, her hand resting gently on his. "If you're watching this," Grandpa began, his voice steady, "then Margaret and I have passed on. We made this decision carefully. Sophia is the only one who has lived by the values we tried to teach: integrity, independence, honesty. She never came to us with her hand out, never treated us as a bank account. She cared for us as family, not as fortune." Grandma's eyes glistened as she leaned closer to the camera. "We love you all, but we have seen the truth. Johnny, Diane, Ethan, Mark, you borrowed and promised but rarely repaid. You chose greed. We cannot leave our life's work in those hands. We trust Sophia to protect this legacy, not just for herself, but for the community." The video ended. Silence pressed down like a weight. My father's face turned purple. "They were insane, senile, we'll sue." Ethan shoved back his chair. "Sign it over, Sophia. We'll manage it together. Don't be selfish." "Eivor." Uncle Mark leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "If you have any sense, you'll divide it fairly before this becomes ugly." I found my voice, trembling but firm. "No. This was their decision. I'll honor it." The room erupted again, but inside me, a line had been drawn. I wasn't just their granddaughter anymore. I was the guardian of everything my grandparents had built, and the storm had only just begun. The days that followed the reading of the will felt like walking through a minefield. Every step I took, every call I answered, carried the weight of my family's rage. My father was the first to strike. He called me that night, his voice dripping with false calm. "Sophia, listen. This inheritance, it belongs to the family. Your grandparents were old, confused. You know they didn't mean to cut us out. Just sign over the company shares, and we'll handle everything." I clenched the phone so tightly it hurt. "No, Dad. They knew exactly what they were doing, and I won't betray them." The mask slipped. His tone turned sharp, threatening. "Don't be stupid. If you refuse, I'll drag you through court until you have nothing left. Don't forget I'm your father. You owe me." The call ended with my hands shaking, but my resolve intact. The next morning, It was my mother. She cried so hard I could barely make out her words. Sophia, please. Don't you love us? Don't you see how much your father is suffering? We're drowning in debt. Ethan is under pressure. We need this money. Just a portion. Her sobs cut into me like knives. For a moment, guilt clawed at my chest. But then I remembered Grandma's words. Don't let emotions cloud your principles. I love you, Mom, I said softly. But I can't undo their wishes. Not even for you. She hung up without another word. Ethan's approach was less subtle. He stormed into my apartment 2 days later, reeking of expensive cologne and desperation. Do you realize what you've done? He hissed, pacing like a caged animal. You're sitting on $39 million while I'm left scraping by. Hand it over, Sophia. We'll manage it together. I'll make sure you're taken care of. I stared at him, stunned by his arrogance. Taken care of? Ethan, I don't need your charity. And this isn't about money, it's about trust. Something you never understood. His face twisted with fury. You'll regret this. I'll make sure the whole world sees you for the selfish brat you are. And he did. The very next day, I saw his posts on social media. Vague accusations that I had manipulated our grandparents, whispers of ungrateful and heartless aimed squarely at me. But it wasn't just Ethan. Uncle Mark began sending long, carefully worded emails from his hotel in Dallas. Sophia, be reasonable. If you divide the estate equally, everyone will benefit. It's only fair. Refuse and I'll involve international lawyers. This could drag on for years. You don't want that burden. His words oozed professionalism, but I could see the greed behind every line. I wrote back once, simply, the will stands. My answer is no. After that, I ignored him. One by one, they came at me pleas, threats, manipulation. Every attack chipped at my heart, but none of them broke me, because beneath the noise, I kept hearing Grandpa's steady voice. Sophia, the truth is your strongest weapon. Still, I won't pretend I wasn't afraid. Lying awake at night, I pictured them banding together, showing up at the ranch, dragging me out of the villa I had just inherited. My phone buzzed, constantly messages from my father promising lawsuits, Ethan threatening to destroy my reputation, my mother begging me to think of the family. I stood at the edge of a storm, and I knew it was only a matter of time before they came for me face to face. It didn't take long for the storm I had feared to arrive. 1 week after the will was read, I moved into my grandparents' villa, the place that had always felt like a second home, now legally mine. The first night, I walked the halls slowly, touching the familiar wooden banister, the framed photos Grandma insisted on keeping, the worn leather chair where Grandpa liked to sit after long days. It was comforting but also terrifying. I could feel the weight of their trust pressing down on me, and then came the pounding on the gate. Through the security cameras, I saw 2 cars pull up. My parents stepped out first, faces flushed with anger. Ethan was behind them, his jaw clenched tight. Uncle Mark emerged from a rental car, polished as ever, a smirk tugging at his lips. They didn't come with flowers or apologies. They came like an army, ready to reclaim what they thought was theirs. Dad bellowed at the top of his lungs. Sophia, open this gate right now. You're living in our house, sitting on our money. Enough games. Ethan slammed his fist against the iron bars. Come out, you coward. You think you can hide behind lawyers? Mom's voice shook, but her words were sharp. Sophia, sweetheart, just open the door. Let's handle this as a family. But I wasn't alone. When I stepped out onto the porch, they froze. Beside me stood Matthew Harris, my grandparents' trusted lawyer, briefcase in hand. Sheriff Ramirez, the local sheriff who had known my grandparents for decades, leaned against his cruiser parked in the driveway. 2 uniformed deputies flanked him, and behind me, in the shadows of the porch, were 3 of my old army comrades, men and women who had served beside me overseas, standing tall, arms crossed, silent but powerful. The sight made my father falter for just a moment, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. He pushed through the gate as the deputies reluctantly let them in. The villa's living room became a battlefield. My family spread out on one side, voices raised, faces twisted with greed. I stood on the other, flanked by the people who represented law, loyalty, and truth. Dad was the first to attack. "This will is a joke. Your grandparents were manipulated. You've brainwashed them into giving you everything. But this house, this company, this fortune, it belongs to all of us. Hand it over, Sophia." Ethan stepped forward, his phone in hand. "I've already posted online. Everyone knows you tricked them. Do you want to see the comments? People think you're a thief, Sophia. A disgrace to the Carter name. You'll lose in the court of public opinion, even if the law sides with you." Uncle Mark adjusted his cufflinks and added coldly, "You can't fight us forever. I have lawyers in England ready to file suit, years of litigation. You'll be buried in debt. Is that what you want?" Their words hit like bullets, but I refused to flinch. Matthew spoke first, calm but commanding. "The will is airtight. There are medical evaluations proving Walter and Margaret were fully competent. The trust fund makes the inheritance untouchable. Legally, Sophia is the sole heir. Any challenge will fail." Sheriff Ramirez crossed his arms. "And let's be clear, if anyone tries to forcibly remove her, you'll be facing criminal charges. This is trespassing at best, attempted theft at worst." My family scoffed, but I could see the flicker of doubt. I stepped forward, my voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. "This isn't about money, it's about trust. Grandpa and Grandma saw the truth long ago. They knew what greed had done to this family. That's why they chose me. And I will honor that choice, even if it means standing against all of you." For a heartbeat, silence fell. Then Ethan exploded. He lunged toward me, finger jabbing in my face. "You're nothing, Sophia. You think being a soldier makes you better? You're a parasite. Hand it over." My army friend Mike stepped between us in an instant, his presence like a wall. Ethan froze. Realizing he wasn't facing his little sister anymore, he was facing a soldier backed by comrades who knew how to stand their ground. "Back off," Mike said quietly, his tone like steel. Ethan faltered, his bravado cracking. Mom tried again, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Sophia, please. We're your family. We need this. Without it, we'll lose everything. Don't you love us enough to share?" My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to crumble at her words. But then I remembered sitting at the ranch table, Grandpa's voice in my ears. Family must be built on respect. Without it, blood means nothing. "I do love you, Mom," I whispered, my voice shaking. "But love doesn't mean giving in to greed. You broke their trust." The room erupted once more, accusations, curses, threats. Dad shouted that he would sue me into the ground. Ethan swore he would ruin me publicly. Uncle Mark sneered that I was too naive to survive this battle. And then I did something they didn't expect. I opened the folder Matthew had prepared and laid it on the table. Inside were copies of loan records, unpaid debts, and even video footage my grandparents had kept of past arguments, proof of every broken promise, every instance of exploitation. "This," I said firmly, "is the truth. If you push me, I'll take it public. Reporters are waiting outside this very gate. The world will know who you are." Their faces drained of color. For once, they were the ones cornered. The tension was unbearable, the air thick enough to choke on. My father's fists trembled at his sides, Ethan's face burned red, and Uncle Mark's smirk vanished. Mom sobbed quietly, staring at the floor. I looked at them one by one, my voice steady. "This villa, this company, this legacy, it isn't yours anymore. And it never will be." The deputies shifted slightly, the sheriff's gaze hard, my comrades unyielding beside me. My family realized the truth. Their intimidation had failed. Finally, my father spat on the floor, his voice a growl. "You'll regret this, Sophia. You've chosen your side. Don't expect mercy when we come back." They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I stood frozen in the silence that followed, my heart hammering. Mike placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did good. You didn't back down." But as I looked around the villa, the place filled with memories of love, laughter, and lessons, I felt both victorious and hollow. My family had become my enemies. The inheritance wasn't freedom, it was a battlefield. and the war had only just begun. The villa was silent after they stormed out, but the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, vibrating with all the venom they had left behind. I stood there in the living room, fists clenched, listening to the echo of my father's threat. "You'll regret this." For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I being selfish? Was I really turning my back on my family? The questions gnawed at me until Samuel, the housekeeper who had served my grandparents for over 20 years, stepped forward. "Miss Sophia," he said gently, "they prepared you for this. They knew it would come to this point, but they also knew you would be strong enough." His words steadied me. That night, I sat with Matthew, my lawyer, at the kitchen table where Grandma once brewed tea. We drafted a document, clear, simple, ironclad. It outlined conditions for anyone in the family who wanted access to the legacy. Respect the will and trust with no disputes. Cease all threats, lawsuits, or defamation. Return all items taken from the villa after the funeral. Any support they received would go only through approved charitable or community projects, never as direct cash. Anyone unwilling to sign would be cut off completely. It wasn't about punishment. It was about drawing a line, giving them one last chance to prove they could be more than their greed. 2 days later, I called them back to the villa, this time with Sheriff Ramirez, Matthew, and Samuel present as witnesses. When my parents, Ethan and Uncle Mark, entered, their faces were hard, already braced for another battle. I handed them the document. "These are the conditions. Sign it and we can move forward together, under the legacy Grandpa and Grandma intended. Refuse, and you'll be excluded completely. No access to the ranch, no share of the company, no support. The choice is yours." My mother's hands trembled as she picked up the papers. I could see the war inside her, desperation clashing with pride. "Sophia, do you really mean to cut us out entirely?" I swallowed hard. "I don't want to. But I will, if you leave me no choice." Dad ripped the document from her hands, his voice a snarl. "This is a trap. We don't need your charity. You think you can dangle crumbs in front of us like we're beggars? Never." Ethan leaned back in his chair, smirking. "I'd rather die broke than sign your pathetic little contract." Uncle Mark gave a cold laugh. "You're too naive, Sophia. You think a few signatures will protect you? This won't end here." I looked at each of them, my chest tight, but my voice steady. "Then it's decided. You've made your choice." I gathered the unsigned papers, slid them back into the folder, and nodded to Matthew. "File the complaints. Every stolen item, every piece of evidence, they go to court." The explosion was immediate. Mom burst into tears, begging me not to do this. Dad's face turned purple with rage. Ethan muttered curses under his breath. Uncle Mark stood, muttering something about international lawsuits. But they had no power left. When they left that day, slamming the villa doors once more, I knew it was over. Whatever bond of blood we had was severed. There was no family left, only adversaries. That evening, I walked to the backyard where my grandparents were buried beneath the old oak tree. The sky was streaked with orange. The ranch bathed in quiet light. I knelt beside their graves, tears spilling freely. I tried Grandma, Grandpa. I gave them a chance, but they chose greed again. "I'll protect what you built, even if it means standing alone." The wind stirred softly through the trees, as if whispering their approval. For the first time since their death, I felt something other than grief. I felt clarity. This inheritance was never about $39 million. It was about a legacy of principles. And now, with the final break behind me, I was free to guard it without hesitation. The battle with my family had ended, but my true work, the work they entrusted to me, was only beginning. In the weeks that followed the final break with my family, the villa became both a sanctuary and a reminder of my burden. The room still carried Grandma's lavender scent, and Grandpa's boots still sat by the door. I walked past them every morning, a silent oath echoing in my mind. I will protect what you built, but protecting wasn't enough. If I only locked the doors and clung to the past, then their legacy would wither. They had trusted me not to hoard, but to grow. So I began. The first step was organizing the chaos. With Matthew's help, I audited every part of the estate properties, investments, debts owed to the company. It was overwhelming, like staring at a puzzle with 1,000 mismatched pieces. Yet, little by little, the picture became clear. Blue Star Logistics, the company Grandpa had started with a single truck, was thriving but vulnerable. Competitors circled like sharks. The ranch, though profitable, needed modernization. And then there were the charities Grandma had quietly supported: hospitals, schools, families in crisis. Without her, many of them would soon struggle. I could hear her voice in my head: "Don't let the roots dry up, Sophia." So, I made a choice. I restructured. I appointed a new board of directors at Blue Star, people Grandpa had trusted, not those who only saw dollar signs. Veterans I had served with joined the security division, bringing discipline and loyalty. I poured money into upgrading the ranch: new irrigation systems, sustainable farming methods, turning it into a model of responsible agriculture in Texas. And most importantly, I established the Walter Margaret Carter Foundation. Its mission was simple: to continue the quiet generosity my grandparents had practiced all their lives. Scholarships for underprivileged students, grants for small businesses trying to stay afloat, support for military families who, like me, knew the invisible scars of service. The first time I stood at the podium to announce the foundation, I was terrified. Reporters filled the room, cameras flashing, whispers about the heiress of 39 million buzzing like bees. My hands trembled on the microphone. But then I thought of Grandma, smiling at me from the kitchen table, saying, "Speak from the heart, Sophia. People feel truth more than they hear it." So I did. My grandparents believed wealth means nothing unless it lifts others. This foundation is not about me. It's about them, and about the values they lived by: integrity, honesty, and service. I will guard this fortune not as a possession, but as a responsibility. When I finished, the room was silent. Then applause rose. Not the shallow kind, but the deep, rolling kind that carries respect. That night my phone buzzed with messages, some from strangers thanking me, others from people who had once worked with my grandparents, offering their support. For the first time since the crash, I felt peace, but it wasn't easy. Ethan tried to sabotage me, spreading lies online that the foundation was a publicity stunt. My father filed yet another lawsuit, claiming undue influence. Uncle Mark wrote op-eds in foreign newspapers, calling me a fraud of inheritance. Yet none of it stuck, because the more they screamed, the more the world saw the truth in contrast, their bitterness against my actions. And as the foundation began awarding scholarships, funding clinics, and revitalizing local businesses, the noise of their attacks faded. One afternoon, months later, I visited a high school in a struggling neighborhood where the Carter Foundation had funded new computers and textbooks. A girl no older than 16 pulled me aside. She held my hand tightly and whispered, "Thank you. Now I believe I can go to college." I nearly broke down in tears. In that moment, the number 39 million meant nothing. What mattered was the spark in her eyes, the same spark I used to see when Grandma handed out pies at Thanksgiving to families who had none. At the ranch, the changes were just as visible. Workers had steady jobs, wages were fair, and the community once again felt the presence of the Carters not as untouchable millionaires, but as neighbors. Sometimes I'd catch Samuel smiling at the sight of children running through the fields, and he'd say, "They'd be proud of you, Miss Sophia." So proud. Those words became my anchor. Because while my family still seethed, I had found a new family: this community. These people whose lives intertwined with mine not through blood, but through trust. Every evening, I walked past the oak tree in the backyard, where my grandparents rested. I would place fresh flowers there, kneel, and tell them about the day's progress. Sometimes I spoke of struggles, lawsuits, rumors, loneliness. Other times I shared victories: a clinic opening, a scholarship granted, a family saved from eviction. And though they never answered, the rustle of leaves always felt like approval. Little by little, the inheritance stopped feeling like a weight and started feeling like wings. It carried me not into isolation, but into purpose. I wasn't just Sophia Carter, the soldier who walked away from her family's empire. I wasn't just the granddaughter who happened to inherit 39 million. I was the guardian of a legacy, and for the first time in my life I finally understood why they chose me. Standing on the porch of the villa one quiet evening, I watched the sun sink behind the Texas hills, painting the sky in gold and crimson. For years, I had believed my grandparents' love was my only anchor, and when they died, I thought I had lost everything. But I was wrong. Their greatest gift wasn't the $39 million, the ranch, or the company. It was the values they lived by. Honesty, independence, trust. The inheritance was simply the test, a way to see if I could carry those values forward when the world tried to tear them from me. I lost my parents, my brother, and my uncle along the way. The blood ties that should have protected me became the chains I had to break. And though that loss still aches, I've gained something greater, a purpose larger than myself. I am not just an heiress. I am the guardian of a legacy built on service and integrity, and as long as I breathe, I will protect it, not for my family's approval, not for the headlines, but for the people whose lives it can change. Because that, I now know, is what true inheritance means.